Hockey days again.
You almost went down.
Remember what they said? You got to keep your head up.
That's great. Oh, there you go.
Okay.
That was smart.
Welcome, everyone, to Council. Let's all rise for a moment of personal reflection. Merci. Councillor Gardner, may I ask you to lead us in the national anthem? Thank you.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. Car ton bras sait porter l'épée, il sait porter la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you. That was particularly lovely, Councillor Gardner. You always do it well, but that was particularly lyrical tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
We acknowledge that we are gathering on the traditional territory of the Mohawk people of Akwesasne. Before we do roll call, I'd just like to highlight that Mr. Hale of the Standard Freeholder, it's his last council meeting tonight. So, oh yes, so we're just keep that in our minds as we move forward. I will have some words of thanks, but I didn't want to forget and just highlight that this is his last meeting.
Well, who's the guy next door to right beside you?
New haircut for Mr. Nick.
Oh, yeah.
Madam Clerk, roll call.
Mayor Bernadette Clément.
Présente.
Councillors Claude McIntosh.
Present.
Elaine McDonald.
Present.
Sid Gardner.
Here.
Dean Hollingsworth.
Present.
Caroline Hébert.
Présente.
Councillors Glenn Grant.
Here.
Todd Bennett.
Here.
Justin Towndale.
Present.
Éric Bergeron. And Councillor Maurice Dupel called in his regrets, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Additions, deletions, or amendments? Madam Clerk?
I have one, Madam Mayor. It's
ahead.
the addition of the Resolution 2020-01, AFMO hosting 2020 Annual Conference.
Okay. So, mover and seconder for adoption of the agenda.
As amended.
Councillor Grant, as amended, seconded by Councillor McIntosh. Any discussion? All in favor? Carried. Any disclosure of interest? Councillor Bergeron.
Yes, on item 17.2 municipal grants, I'll declare conflict. Company I work for receives funds through municipal grants.
Madam Clerk? Did you get that?
I sure did, thank you.
Thank you. A motion to go into Committee of the Whole. Councillor Gardner, Councillor McDonald, all in favor? Carried. Minutes. Monday, January 13, 2020 was our last meeting. So we need a mover and a seconder for the minutes. Councillor McDonald and Councillor Bennett. Any discussion? All in favor? Carried. Madam Clerk.
We have one presentation this evening. It is the business plan for the fire station and training center by Collier's project leaders.
Welcome to our City Council.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council.
Okay.
As you know, we've been working diligently at the procurement of land for our next fire station. We're now at the point where we we are publicly releasing the business plan which led to the information helping us make that decision. The fine folks from Colliers are going to walk us through the highlights of that report, which has been released and is on the city website as we speak. So with us tonight, I'd like to welcome Ms. Allison Wesley James, Mr. Surya Pulikal, and obviously we all know Jeff Weber. And Allison and Surya will walk us through the presentation. Then we'll take questions, and between Jeff and I, we will talk maybe a little bit about the next steps. And without any further ado, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you. It's our pleasure to be here. As you just heard, I'm Allison Wesley James, and I'm a director with Colliers Project Leaders. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Surya. I know that time is of the essence, and let him get into our report.
Hello everyone, I'm Surya Pulikal. I'm a senior advisor with Colliers Project Leaders, and yes, I was involved with the development of this business plan, and in the next few minutes I'll walk you through the process of the business plan and how we arrived at our decision to go forward. So in this feasibility study, we considered 7 sites to begin with, and the reason why we did that was we wanted to find out which was the most suitable. And when we began the study, the fire department had provided us with their prior studies, which identified as to which part in the city this fire station, the new fire station location should be ideally located. And around that we started our search, and we quickly found out that it could be around the Brookdale Avenue corridor, and that's what you see highlighted on the slide here. And along the Brookdale Avenue corridor, we were able to identify some 7 sites. And of that, when we applied the criteria that was required for a fire station and training center, we quickly were able to shortlist that to about 4 sites, and we performed our analysis on those 4 sites. And in the next few slides, I'll walk you through as to how that decision was made. So our approach was 2-pronged. We did a qualitative and a quantitative approach. In the qualitative side, we looked at the physical factors that would influence the selection. And in addition to the physical factors, we looked at the municipal services and zoning of those sites, connectivity, impact on external entities, ownership structure, the move-in time, how much time it'll take to finally move into the new place, real estate management opportunities, how effectively we can control our site, then how can we manage the public perception if we choose a particular site. On the quantitative side, we looked at the total development cost, the funding sources that we could use to fund those costs, operating expenses involved if we build at a particular location using a particular method, or maybe if we lease the fire station space at a particular location. Then potential operating cost savings, capital expenditure, that is going forward in the life cycle of the whole building, how much more additional investment we'll have to make. And the other thing was debt service, depending on how we fund it, how much additional debt payment we'll have to do on top of the operating expenses that we'll incur going forward during its life cycle. And we took it all and combined it to calculate something we call the net present value, which takes in the essence of all those costs and funding components, and we use the net present value to compare the financial performance of the 4 sites. So while we were doing that, we also took all this information to the public. We conducted a public consultation, and we laid out all these site options and we tried to gather the feedback of the public with regards to the options we had laid out. So the public consultation had a good attendance, where there were about 36 attendees, and of the 36, I think about 30 were firefighters, and we got a very positive response on the sites that we had laid out at that time. And if I remember correctly, I mean, what we had recorded at that time was that the toll gate, the site, one of the sites, which was at the intersection of the toll gate and Brookdale, were considered a favorable location. So this is that site. So at the intersection of toll gate and Brookdale, we had identified a 5-acre lot. Why 5 acre? Because we, when we did our analysis, which I'll walk you through in the next slide, we determined that the minimum area required is about 4 acres. So if you have a slightly larger area, we can accommodate any future expansion we might need going forward. So in this slide, we have tried to identify what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that this site has. And the number one strength is that it's a corner site, meaning it has access from 2 roads, in this case a major arterial road of the city of Cornwall, which makes it easier to access any part in the city easily. The other is the other road can be used for any day-to-day operations, providing a very clear path of traffic within the site. And the other positives are that it's not near any dense residential area or commercial area. Many other properties that we initially took into consideration, they were located there, so that's why they're not there. And it's located within the urban settlement boundary of the city, and which means that it is in the city services limit. Right now the site is outside of the service area, but you still can connect to the city sewage services, but that's not a problem because the work is already underway to extend the municipal services to this site. So I won't dwell on the rest of the items. I'll move on to the next slide. It's all there in the report. This is the schematic layout of the fire station and the training facility. In the front, you can see the building, and we have laid out how you enter and access the fire station. And at the back, you have the fire training facility with the fire training structures at the center as well as around it. So this is a snapshot of the cost, the total development cost. This is particularly for that 5-acre site, inclusive of the land acquisition cost, which we estimated at that time as 1.5 million, but I think the actual costs are much lower. I think we were able to negotiate a better price. And the cost that we have estimated here, it's based on the recent estimates of fire stations built in the last couple of years. And the cost that you see here for fire station, the 6.5 million, it includes the soft costs as well. That is the consulting fees, project management fees, all that included. And also, it's not just the building, it's also the site development costs as well. So that's a snapshot of our analysis, walking through all the methodology and the final cost estimate. Any questions?
There are questions. Councillor Hollingsworth first.
I have just one question. You just go back to the slide where you established your criteria, going back a little further, right there. Okay, so I'm looking at the qualitative and quantitative, and please forgive me, but I'm not a firefighter, so I really don't know necessarily what I'm talking about. But when you look at all of the criteria, the one thing that I don't understand is nowhere was there any reference to response times. And I would think that response times would be important. How fast can we get to the fire?
It certainly is, and I think.
And yet it's not up there in terms of
Yes,
the
yes.
criteria.
I would be happy to answer that. So the modeling for our response capability occurred prior to us hiring Colliers. So Colliers' mandate,
Okay.
they were to select a site that was in the area of search based on the modeling that we had done prior to that.
Okay.
So the response time, which by the way is, the drive time is one component of a response time, that work was done prior to that. It would have been initiated at the time of the fire master plan. And then we worked on an enhanced two-station model that I presented here no less than 3 times. And so, in fact, the modeling and the numbers around the response times came to council, I counted no less than 8 times over the last 3 years. Since 2015, when the fire master plan.
So let me ask you this question then logically, and maybe you presented it to us and I don't recall. The 4 sites that you looked at, your kind of short list, am I to assume then the response times based on your previous analysis was a mitigating factor? In other words, it had no bearing, the locations, all response times were about the same? Is that what I'm gathering?
Kind of. So what we did is we determined that the best possible enhanced two-station model from a drive time perspective was Brookdale and the 13th area.
Okay.
That was the mandate giving to Colliers. So there is no available land that fits these other criteria in that location. So they developed that corridor up and down Brookdale looking at other sites. There were sites identified through, for example, the open house. We received 3 comments about the old Brentag location, which became available throughout the process. And that was part of the work that Colliers did, was to find out if that property was available, which it was not.
Okay.
But in addition to that, when we modeled the drive response time from that location, we weren't as good as the 13th and Brookdale area.
Right.
In essence, the current two-station model we have now provides 69% coverage of all buildings in the city. Moving to that 13 and Brookdale area brings us to 93%. And moving a little further north provides us actually with a 1% additional coverage. So we're at 94% coverage of all buildings within that 6-minute timeline.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor McIntosh and then Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chief. Interested in the number of people who showed up for the meetings you had. You got 36, 30 were firefighters, and I assume of those 30 firefighters, maybe half live in the city and half live outside, which means not many people from the city really showed any interest in this.
It was, in light of the fact that we had advertised, you know, the approximate location that we were looking at, we expected more of the public and the residents of that area to show up. We thought we did a good job in advertising through the social media, through the papers, but surprisingly enough, and some of the steam may have been taken away from, I think that was in and around the election time, so maybe people were just more interested in what was happening in council chambers, but I was a bit disappointed that we didn't get more residents show up.
I have received no calls from citizens concerned about response times. I've received emails from the president of the Firefighter Association concerned about response times, but nothing from the citizens of Cornwall. It just seems that it's not an issue with the people who elect us. Have you gotten any feedback?
I have received no letter from either residents or the president of the
Yeah.
association.
6-minute response time is pretty good.
I mean, there are municipalities that have a higher target than that. and
I would
it's-
assume those are areas served by volunteer firefighters.
And some urban.
Yeah, and I've never heard anybody in those areas complain about 10, 15 minutes possibly getting to their responding to their fire calls.
Well, listen, I think through the previous presentations, I've been clear that it's council that decides the needs and circumstances of the level of service it wants to offer. We've provided a lot of detailed information on how we're, recommending that be done. And as long as council is happy with the area that we're going to, based on those recommendations, that's really where my focus is.
Yeah, so we still have the east end covered, we got a station east end, and now we have a station at Brookdale. We have the north end covered, and I would assume that your response time from the new site to the Riverdale area is probably just as good, if not better, than the downtown station.
Well, the interesting thing is what the modeling showed, and again, those were presentations we made here, but what the modeling showed is that even the 3-station model didn't provide any more coverage than the enhanced 2-station model, right? Because at some point you're saturating your response times, and it just becomes a factor of moving within traffic flow. And you know what? I would say that there are other things we can do to get better at responding, right? Turnout time is a big one, and all those elements. So I would say that when you're in the 90 percentile in terms of coverage of your municipality, and we're lucky that we have a 62 square kilometer footprint to cover, we're in a good place. We could always be better. I would love to have a fire station at every city corner.
I think if you asked the paramedics, same thing, they could, they'd like to have better response times, but
Sure.
it's pretty good as it is. Do we own the land now?
Yes.
So it's not an issue now with site. We own the land, it's gonna be built there. So that's a fait accompli. Okay, thank you, Chief.
Councillor Gardner.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm not going to be very long because my questions basically were covered by Councillor McIntosh. However, having been on council for about 12 years now, one of the issues that came up every time I was on council was access to the north. So that this will give us much better access to the north. Thank you.
Councillor Grant and then Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was one of the 6 that attended the consultation, and I thought it was very well done. My Scottish blood always looks at dollars, and so I'm looking at the training center cost would be $680,000, and I look on return on investment. Now, we'll be doing our own in-house training.
Correct. We've started doing more in-house training or more activities within the boundaries of the city, and this will allow us to do even more. But I think more importantly, it will allow us to really hone in on certain things because we have the facility to do it, and just get better at it.
We'll be bringing firefighters into our community, hopefully.
We could. I mean, certainly that's where I would like to go. There's certainly other aspects to that could complicate that, but certainly I think the city of Cornwall and its fire department could be, the Eastern Ontario hub for providing training. If we have, this is a big step, and having the facility to do it certainly helps.
Good. The current site that you're at, what's the plans for that now?
So the current site that we're using now, that was essentially just, it was all temporary. So they're sea cans, if you will, those containers that we're using there. That site, the plan for that site was to return it to the city and to be used for whatever other plans the city has.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you. I have quite a few questions about this, but my first would be to you or maybe the CAO. Does this presentation mean the business plan and the price of the land is public information now?
Madam CAO.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, with the bylaw that we passed, the purchase of the land is public, would share the purchase price as well.
The business plan as well? This is what this is?
Yes, so the document is on our website as of today.
So this is a summary of the business plan that you've written?
Yes.
Correct? This? So I want to go to a few bullet points that you've written. And the first one, which Councillor McIntosh highlighted, the public consultation. So I want to first just be very clear. I'm opposed to this. I was opposed to it at budget time. I don't hide that. I was outvoted, and that's fine. I respect council's decisions. I think this presentation should have been a year ago. I think this should have happened first, and then we start talking about how much we're going to spend and where we're going to buy. I digress. My question is very simple. Your public consultation session was attended by 36 people, one of which was Councillor Grant, two of which were my wife and I, because I was running for council. I thought that would be a big deal. 30 of the 36 were firefighters, and yet the next bullet point says, indicated a strong preference for the location at the intersection of Brookdale Avenue and Tollgate. Can you first explain where that data comes from, and second, explain how that is actually possible? Because as far as I know, 32 of the 36 are opposed to this location.
Sorry, I wasn't aware of the fact that 30 plus attendees were opposed to that location. This is coming off of the data we collected at the consultation.
Well, that's fair. The consultation in your bullet point says 36 people attended,
Yeah.
30 of which were firefighters, many of who are here today. I was 2 of the 6. Councillor Glenn Grant was 1 of the 6. Where is the data coming from saying that a strong preference for the location at the intersection of Brookdale Avenue, I was opposed to that? So I'm just curious, where is that data from? I'm sure you have it. I just don't understand where it's coming from.
So
when-
Chief?
Yeah, absolutely, through you, Madam Mayor. So the data, and that was essentially the infamous sticky notes and the results from the Q&A of that session. I have them right here, so I'll pass them around. They did not specifically talk about a property. They spoke mostly, so it talks about how how do you feel about the need for Cornwall Services presence in the northwest quadrant of the city? Okay, so the comments are all there. If I look at them, they seem overwhelmingly positive. There was 3 comments, making a recommendation to look at a different property further south on Brookdale, but otherwise, these comments to me, which were gathered at that event, seem positive.
So the data indicates that, I can't read it right now, I'm standing talking to you, but
Correct.
I've read the business plan. The public has had 4 days to read it. I just don't understand how a strong preference for this location, so we're not talking about northeastern quadrant. The bullet point says Brookdale Avenue and Tollgate. Was there a strong preference for Brookdale Avenue and Tollgate? We've already purchased the land. Was there a strong preference in that
So
public consultation?
what I'm trying to explain, Councillor, is at that session, we discussed the northwest quadrant of the city, because at that time, we were looking at and evaluating different options, and we were bringing those options to the fine folks of the city for their comments. And what I just distributed were simply the comments received during that session, and that you can make that determination for yourself.
So, thank you. I am making that determination. I think it's wrong. I don't understand how, if I know for fact 32 of the 36 residents at this event were opposed to this location. A northeastern quadrant, give me a second to read this, but
So it's actually the first question on the first page. Make it simple.
the first question is, have you felt the need for Cornwall Fire Service in the northwest quadrant of the city? That's the question you're talking about? So is that Brookdale and Tollgate?
It's Brookdale and 13th in that general area.
So that's a no. Question is the northwest quadrant? Well, I want to get into semantics. These are bullet points in the presentation, and they're important because it's a, 150-page document in 6 slides. And this is the first time the public gets to talk about this.
What I'm trying to explain to you, Councillor, is at that time, in the process, we were presenting the general area that we were looking at, along with the 4 identified possible areas.
Okay.
The session was part of our determining factors to specify whether it was going to be Brookdale and Tollgate. Now, these comments, if you read them, they speak highly of that northwest quadrant which helped us identify that specific property that we ended up purchasing.
So,
Go ahead, jump
yeah,
in.
so in the most northwest quadrant of that area, I would say there were two properties, one of which was the one at the intersection of Tollgate and Brookdale, and the other one was a little further north on the east side of Brookdale. But that site was too big, and at the same time, about 40% of was in a floodplain area. So that was less ideal compared to the Brookdale site. So when we're looking at a site in that northwest quadrant, this automatically becomes the most suitable site with that criteria.
Bullet point says,
Mhm.
attendees indicated a strong preference for the location of Brookdale and Tollgate. What you just said is not that.
Yes, the sites under consideration, we have to look at also the sites under the consideration, right?
Right.
So the other indication was the Brentag site, which is not part of the 4 sites that were shortlisted. We couldn't get that in the list because there was no response from the owners.
I'm not
So,
asking about the list. I'm asking very specifically about the bullet points you have in this presentation, which is a summary of the business plan, which I voted against. Attendees indicated a strong preference for the location of the intersection of Brookdale and Tollgate. You just said to me there were 2 locations that were included.
mhm.
So did the attendees actually suggest this is the location we suggest?
Well, there was a reference to this site in the responses.
The attendee, these comments basically told us that the 2 sites at the northwest quadrant of Brookdale are the preferred sites.
Okay, that's
It
a,
wasn't specific to that one property because all 4 were on the table.
thank you.
Yeah, so, sorry. One of the, so the Brookdale, the site at the Brookdale and Tollgate intersection, that had 2 parts. It was a huge site. So one was the corner site and the other was the one adjacent to that. So that was the other option. So the intersection preference would mean either of those 2 sites.
Well, I know that. I've read the business plan. I've seen it in camera. I have been privileged to see it. The public has only had 4 days to look at this. This bullet point, though, becomes wrong. The public, which includes the firefighters who voted on this, did not suggest that Brookdale and Tollgate. It just said northwest quadrant. Correct? Correct me on that?
There was a reference to this site in particular. You can, it's in the notes. It was transcribed from the notes we collected at the public consultation.
Thank you. Would you back that up?
It wasn't only specific to that one property.
So this bullet point is incorrect?
If you want to say that, it's not as inclusive as it could have been.
Do you want to move on to another question?
I want an answer to that question. The bullet point says, and this is a very important part of the decision-making process of land we've already purchased, that Brookdale and Tollgate are strongly preferred location by the people attending. And that does not seem to be the case. So you can either say that is the case or it is 2 locations. And if it's 2 locations, it's okay. But that's not what the bullet point says. And I can only speak to the presentation. I appreciate the business plan is already approved and we're moving forward.
So when we speak of the northwest quadrant, at the time of the session, that should have included the 3 properties, right? The 2 Tollgate properties and the 1 Brookdale. So that statement or that bullet point in the presentation, not the report, but in the presentation, is probably not as inclusive as it could have been. It should have included the other 2 properties. But, okay.
Next question?
Yep, thank
Go
you.
ahead.
I have many. I have 19 other questions, but I'll keep it straightforward. So one of the threats listed here is that people who live in that quadrant of the city who were adamantly opposed to a Walmart being built there have not yet been consulted, and we've built land there. Why is that not considered like you listed as a threat, potential opposition from residential neighbors. Has anyone in those neighborhoods been consulted about this being a location of a fire hall?
The,
I'll join it. So, I mean, the public consultation meeting was the one that we anticipated we would be able to pull in residents to get their comments. I received a few phone calls from residents asking specific questions from that area, but unfortunately, like I said earlier, they didn't show up. Or I don't know how many showed up.
So why would potential opposition be a threat if that was already discussed as part of the process?
so that is something we have faced in all kinds of projects, be it residential, retail, commercial. There was always that factor to be taken into consideration.
That's a fair answer. Now, this is a training center. Will there be live fire training happening at this location?
So this is where, as we kind of wean in on the design function of it, in light of the location and the fact that we are within the city limits, I think we will be looking at alternative to live fire training scenarios. So manufactured smoke or that kind of thing.
Pardon my lack of expertise in firefighting, but what does that mean in terms of the businesses directly east of this location?
So it'd be there's different technologies that exist now. So these are manufactured smoke, so they're not real fires. There's not real chemicals or gas burning, and they burn rather clean, so there wouldn't be any effect to the adjoining properties. But this is why we need to do some of that work to determine exactly distances and what technology best fits in that kind of area.
Is that in the business plan?
What is included in the business plan is the cost of that training facility. While we design in greater detail, we will identify the exact technology that we use. So it's in the business plan, it's included as part of these costs.
I share my colleagues' concern for the fact that this presentation doesn't highlight at all response times, which to me is the most critical deciding factor of where we put a fire hall. Now, we've already decided that, so I'm only commenting on this presentation. I'm aware of this. But I don't see that in your presentation. Why would that be omitted from a 100-page document, turning it into 6 pages? Isn't fire response time the most critical thing we're talking about here?
So fire response times were initiated through the fire master plan process. They were discussed at length through the fire master plan implementation committee level. No recommendations came from those presentations to council, and essentially that led to council agreeing with the enhanced two-station model based on the modeling and the information that it had. So that information has long come to council, and you know, essentially that led to council's decision during budget to give us the green light to go ahead and hire Colliers based on that work. So in short, that council's already dealt with that issue. And the results of it, by the way, so the results of the modeling are in the report. What was given to Colliers as the goal to have an HQ in and around Brookdale and 13th is in the report.
Thank you. I've read the report. I understand that, and this to me highlights what I've been for a year now talking about process being wrong. To me, this presentation should have happened a year ago, then we should have had a public consultation about it, then budget meeting, then decided where to buy it. That's not the process we took. We own the land, I get it. And I've been outvoted, and so you are correct in this regard that council has approved this. To me, this is not an adequate summary of what I've read in the business plan. I would have expected from both of you, from all of you, much more in terms of response times, public safety, the actual cost of the land. That's been a month and a half since we bought that land. I don't see that in this report, and so I'm very disappointed in this presentation. I don't support anything that's in this. I still remain opposed to anything about this fire hall. Thank you.
Chief Voisin.
I think while I appreciate Councillor Bergeron's comments regarding the process and how he feels it was backwards. I mean, we have professionals here that deal with this with other municipalities all the time. Maybe we could ask them if this is any way different than what's been done in other municipalities.
Allison, Saria?
Alison, do you want to?
Sure. So we work with a variety of municipalities throughout the country, and they each have their own, say, bylaws and structure as to how they carry out procurement and their strategic and operational planning. But this is not particularly unusual, and this procedure and the process that you followed has been reflected in other municipalities that we've worked with as well. And it's challenging for you as to what can be public and what has to be within a closed environment based on market forces and looking to get fair market value for any purchases that you make. So I think that action in particular was very consistent with other municipalities.
Saria?
I have only dealt with a similar situation only once with another municipality. Again, the same procedure was followed. Unfortunately, I'm not able to divulge which municipality it was, but the process was very similar. Again, the concern was that information could affect the price of the asset. So that's why this process is followed.
Councillor McDonald?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I notice, Chief, as you speak, you're very careful to use the phrase enhanced two-station model. And I'm wondering just what you mean by that, what factors make this an enhanced model? Is it something to do with both stations taken together, or is it this station, this is the enhanced one? Maybe just elaborate on the use of that word.
Right, and unfortunately, I can't take the credit for the term. That was Dillon Consulting, the folks who created the fire master plan. So essentially, it's looking at the three-station model, looking at the results coming out of that, and then finding a precise location to be able to meet the same response characteristics, but with one less station, right? So, you know, we talk about the overlap that exists in the current station modeling plan, leaving the two stations where they are and moving and adding a third station is not very productive in terms of maximizing our response times within the city, because that overlap continues to exist. So it essentially comes down to that.
Well, thank you.
Any other questions from council? I just wanted to go back to your weaknesses and threats, your SWOT analysis. And maybe this question is for Chief Voisin, but are there any plans to address those weaknesses and threats? Is there anything in the works around those two boxes?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as we work towards the RFP process and we bring in you know, engineers and city folks that can help us. I mean, there's the traffic issue, there's the controlling of the systems. We will look at addressing as many of those items as possible.
And will there be further public consultation?
Well, I think as we move forward, if we start seeing some sort of response from the public that seems to be negative, definitely we will. But I can say that so far, I've had a couple of mainly the few comments, the calls that I've gotten are folks that are worried about full light sirens and horns going off at 2 a.m. And that's just a little bit of education. Obviously, that's not the way we function.
So in my experience, public consultation and transparency is a good thing. You can't do enough of it, actually. And it can help as you decide or as we move forward. I lived through that Walmart discussion. I was on council and I was chairing PAC then, so I remember doing meetings at the Civic Complex with 100+ folks there. And it was, you know, people in the neighborhood were interested in what was going to happen and did have something to say. So sometimes it's the way that you approach the public. There are ways to be more creative and more inclusive to make sure that you get more than Councillor Bergeron and his wife And Councillor Grant, I mean, you know, there are ways to get more people in a room. So I think we need to endeavor to do more as we move forward. The other thing I'd like to comment on is those response times, and I understand Councillor Hollingsworth's point and Councillor Bergeron's point, those things have come to council. Absolutely, we've seen them. It doesn't hurt to remind us of those things, right? So every time a presentation is made to council, you know, sometimes we need to be reminded of the history and the things that came before. So it's just a comment. I do want to thank you for your presentation. We do appreciate your coming to council. You can see that this is of great interest to our community, to the firefighters, and to all of the people around this table and in this room. So, merci. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
We have no delegations, which means we're moving on to the consent items. The first item is a proclamation with a recommendation that council proclaim the month of February 2020 as Black History Month in the city of Cornwall. Item 2 is a PAC report recommending that council approve the following programs. A for 47 Cumberland, B for 237 Water Street East, and C for 108 Pitt Street. Our next item is the RFP Terms of Reference for LeMay Street Extension and Roundabout Design, and the recommendation that council receive this report. RFP Terms of Reference for Nick Kineb Drive Extension, with a recommendation that council receive this report. And finally, a fourth quarter non-competitive procurement report, with a recommendation that council receive the fourth quarter non-competitive procurement report for the period ending December 31st, 2019.
Consent items moved by Councillor Ibao, seconded by Councillor Grant. I'd like to highlight the fact that there are RFPs in the consent section, and I would like to ask Madam CAO to speak to those matters.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we have two terms of reference on our agenda tonight in consent, and that is a follow-up from a report from council to allow for these terms of reference to come to an agenda if they meet certain criteria. So we looked at RFPs that had a dollar amount that we estimate will likely cost more than $150,000, or something where we think there will be a change in level of service. So for this evening's agenda, we put it on consent. We wanted to let council know this is our thoughts of bringing these items forward. We'll put them on consent, and then if council would like to discuss them in greater detail or want to pull them out, they can pull them out. We will move them to communications. So it's just it's the first time we've put these on the agenda this evening.
So it's in response, in direct response to what council has requested going forward. Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you. I am one of the people who adamant requested this.
Point
This
of
is
order, Madam Mayor. Nobody pulled
Councillor
anything out of consent. We're moving on. This is completely out of order.
No.
Completely.
I understand, Councillor Grant, but this is new because this is the first time that we're doing this, so I'm going to allow Councillor Bergeron to
It's
address.
not new. We knew it was coming.
Yes,
We're
it's a new,
discussing something that should have been pulled.
I understand, it's a new process.
But we're adults. We read. We should understand the process. We don't have to get up and talk on it. We've already addressed it.
Understood, Councillor Grant. I'm chairing the meeting and I'm allowing Councillor Bergeron to speak.
But that's not your prerogative to do that. You have to go to council to see that they approve it.
Suspend the rules.
I've asked the CAO to address this new process
I agree, and
because
and
it's
that's
new.
fine.
It's in direct response to what council wants. Council wanted these matters, the RFPs, not simply to be put, you know, without us having any kind of input. So this is coming in consent for the first time. And that's why I had Madam CAO address this new process in response to a request made by council. Councillor Bergeron would like to address.
Madam Mayor, what I'm saying is I've read it and I understood what the process was. Everybody else must have done the same because nobody questioned it or pulled it. So therefore, the process has to go on.
We should not be debating this or discussing it because it should be moved on.
This is not going to be a debate, and I am the one who asked Madam CAO to introduce this new process, and now I'm sure Councillor Bergeron is going to be brief, and I'll allow you to speak. So go ahead,
I
Councillor Bergeron.
agree with Councillor Grant, sorry.
Okay.
I shouldn't be speaking right now. I just wanted to say I'm thankful this is part of the process now. Thank you.
You were brief. Perfect. Anybody else?
Not now.
All in favor? Against? Thank you. Next item, Madam Clerk.
We're moving on to resolution. We have one, hosting the 2020 annual conference. Now therefore be it resolved that the AFMO be invited to hold its 2020 conference in the city of Cornwall.
Moved by Councillor Gardner and seconded by, it says here, Councillor McIntosh.
That's correct.
Councillor Gardner?
Well, I really spoke about it the last one, and I spoke out of turn, so I'm happy to see it's coming. And again, we received a letter from FMU confirming that they're supporting the French University. That issue's not over yet.
Thank you for that. I would agree that that issue's not over yet. Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Any further discussion on this motion? All in favor? Against? Carried.
Moving on to communications. Our first item is the medical scholarship loan agreement for Julie Crevier, with a recommendation that council approve Julie Crevier as the 2020 medical scholarship loan program recipient.
Councillor Grant, seconded by Councillor Hébert. Any discussion?
One question.
Councillor McIntosh, yes?
Is Julie, is she a native of Cornwall? Is she from Cornwall?
Mr. Boileau?
Through you, Madam Mayor, she's a resident of Alexandria.
Any other questions? I had a comment. This is a bit of a new process, right? Because we're going back. Can you explain just that change? And is this the first time, and is this, do you think, something that's going to happen more regularly as we move forward?
Through you, Madam Mayor, in the beginning, we were getting students who were in their first year.
Mm-hmm.
And that was working fine, but in fact, what happens is as they get further into the program, they become more confirmed as to what their interests are. And so the last scholarship that we awarded, the person was in his 5th year and is in fact graduating this year. And so what we like about this process is that they're very much confirmed as being family practitioners as opposed to perhaps wanting to do a specialty, which is very difficult to determine if you're in your first year or second year. And so, yes, we have dealt with other applications where they're further into the program. In the early days, we were more likely dealing with people who were in their first year.
Okay.
So we have a mixture of those situations. This is our 5th medical scholarship candidate, and I can say too that because of the way we've been dealing with the last couple, we're going to see more practitioners quicker in coming this year and in the next year and so on.
Okay.
So I think as a committee, we think, certainly we're happy to deal with first year applicants, but we would, certainly encourage anyone who's further in the process and is from the SDNG community to consider our application process.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Boileau. Councillor Gardner?
Correct me if I'm wrong, through you.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Crevier is looking at possible taking a specialty after the 5 years are up, according to the report.
So what this agreement allows is that you can do a specialization, but it means that you're primarily going to be a family practitioner, but perhaps have a specialty. And the agreement allows for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you to the committee for their work as well.
Right.
All in favor? Against? Carried.
Municipal Grants Fund Program Review. Recommended that council approve the following: A, Municipal Grants Program Policy; B, Municipal Grants Review Committee Terms of Reference; C, municipal grants guidelines, and D, community partnership program policy. And that council, upon approval of the above, open the application period on February 10th, 2020, and close the application period on March 9th, 2020 for this year, and form a municipal grants review committee pursuant to the Municipal Grants Review Committee terms of reference.
So, Madam CAO, a lot of labor went into this project. So I'm just wondering if we should introduce, or Councillor Hollingsworth, did you want to?
I'm ready to make a motion, Your Worship.
What's your motion?
Support the recommendations in the report.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Bennett. So, Madam CAO, I think maybe Madam CFO might want to do a brief introduction and review of this, and then we can have further debate around the motion that's been made.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Following Council's direction, a working group was formed. On that committee was Councillor Hollingsworth, Councillor McIntosh, Councillor Bennett, as well as Mark Wallow, Cindy Del Greco from Financial Services, and myself. We were tasked with taking a look at the municipal grants program for the city. And so we have before you this evening, we're presenting that. On page 150, 151, you'll see the highlights. There, as part of the municipal grants program, there's program 1 and program 2. Program 1 includes financial and in-kind services, and program 2 is for those nonprofit organizations that may receive federal or provincial funding, and it's contingent on having a municipal component. And the process will be that the application, the open period will be in the month of September. There will be, through the terms of reference, a committee with 3 councillors, 2 administration, and 1 reporting secretary will review the applications and approve the applications, communicate that to the recipients. And then annually a report will come to council that outlines the recipients, the amount received, and the benefit to the community. The committee did take it one step further, and they are putting before council a recommendation for a community partnership fund, and that's for organizations that may come before council that are looking to partner with the city for some forms of capital works, capital projects that exceed $100,000. So there will be a process to follow in that regard as well.
Thank you. So I'll go to questions. I imagine the mover and the seconder may want to speak as well. So Councillor Hébert first, and then Councillor Grant.
Great, thanks, Madam Mayor. I do have some questions, not 19, but I have 6 here. I'll try to be brief. Thank you for all the work done with this. It's quite detailed. Program B, so I have a question on Program B. Will this take place of the existing agreements that are with some of our senior clubs? So if I recall, at the beginning of my first term of council, these senior clubs were coming to the grant presentation day during budget, presenting their budgets, presenting their operations, and then our matching funds would allow them to then receive their provincial or federal funding. But we realized that this was something that was happening every year, and we should just make them a regular part of our budget. So does this mean that they now have to come back to council every year and request that funding and it not be guaranteed?
Madam CFO?
Through you, Madam Mayor, they don't have to come to council for approval, but they
Sorry.
do have to submit an application, and that will confirm every year that there is a responsibility for the municipality to put in an allocation of funding to get those funds. Right now, programs change all the time, and so we thought to ensure that we're up to date, consistent with the legislation of today, that we receive those applications and that they become part of the process.
Okay, and that would be included within the 200,000 that's been allocated to this.
That's correct.
And if I remember correctly, there were 3 senior clubs that would come regularly to request funding, and I'm not sure if that has changed. Are there still 3 that regularly get the 30,000 from us?
2.
2. Okay, so we're down 60,000 already. So, so what would happen in a situation where if there's a lot of other grant applications in a year, and we don't approve, or the committee, sorry, doesn't approve these senior clubs? Would we,
So
if
the
there were
com-
other priorities that came up in a grant?
The
period.
working group did speak to that, and the program, the envelope itself is $200,000. $200,000 for Program 1, Program 2, and in-kind services, which is part of Program 1. And the committee would determine what best suited our municipality and what provided most benefit. And it could be that there are 3 organizations that receive funding to support their organization that receive provincial and federal funding as well. We wanted the envelope to be open so that it wasn't pocketed to certain groups or types, that they could actually fold over into one another.
Okay.
Depending on what was requested each year.
Thank you for that. So on page 4, sorry, I don't have the paper copy, so I don't know what that looks like in an agenda. Under exclusions, we have regionally oriented or special interest groups. So that would exclude a nonprofit that may serve the population of Cornwall, but also serves the outlying region, if I understand correctly.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it wouldn't exclude them necessarily,
Okay.
but there would be an expectation that if they're serving an area greater than Cornwall, that there may be funding required from other funding sources or other municipal bodies.
Okay. And then on the special interest group portion, maybe you can give a bit more explanation there, because most nonprofits do serve a special interest group. For example, Beyond 21, which is located within the city and serving mainly city residents, their special interest group would be persons with intellectual disabilities, because they're only serving a special interest group. Would they be considered excluded from this opportunity?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that wasn't my understanding of what the policy, how we wrote the policy. It was more so interest groups, meaning an individual, a sports organization. It was more to be very specific to what that organization did to the community and who it benefited.
Okay. Couple more, sorry. Surplus in revenue may disqualify is another item that was mentioned in here. And I know often in the nonprofit world, a budget that is presented at the beginning of the year often doesn't look like the budget that we are ending the year with. Often, if we're lucky enough, we'll be successful in getting a grant throughout the year, which may leave a surplus in our bank accounts temporarily. Would that disqualify someone from applying if there are monies left in a bank account? So I'm wondering, do nonprofits have to end the year with a zero balance to qualify for this grant?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't believe so, but there will be a requirement that if there are funds with that organization, that they're for a specific purpose. So if they don't need the funds in 1 year and they're able to run off of the surplus, we would like to redirect those dollars, because there's always more application requests than money in the budget.
That's tough. So in-kind services, so it's mentioned that in-kind services and financial grant requests can equal up to $10,000. So this means an organization can apply for both in-kind and financial contributions, so long as it's within that $10,000?
That is correct.
Okay, and I've got a couple more. Sorry, I'm almost done. And so, within the application process, will those applicants be aware of how much those in-kind services are? Because I think an organization may not be aware of what a rental of a room or picnic tables for a event may cost, and so may not be able to estimate what the balance would be to apply for.
Through you, Madam Mayor, city staff will help them with that, just like when we put together an application for funding, we have to do our homework and get that information in order to complete our application.
Okay, perfect. So staff will be available to support the applicants in that process. Great. Final question. Will committee meetings be closed or open?
We discussed that. We believe that they will be closed
Great.
because the expectation is that we will see financial information from the nonprofit organizations.
Which most of that information is usually public, as they're usually publicly funded. However, I do believe that these discussions should take place in a closed setting, as most grant deliberations with any other agencies is usually done in a closed setting. So I'm very happy to see that. And I'm sure if there are any questions on a refused application, that the committee can certainly respond to those on one-on-one basis with those organizations. Thank you. A lot of work went into this. Thank you for clarifying all of my questions.
Councillor Grant and then Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just the process, so I understand it, the gross amount at the budget time, which we'll say 200,000, because that's a term that's been used, that is approved by council, and then the committee then does the interviews, the distribution of the funds, correct?
Madam CFO.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that is correct, and it will be followed up annually with a report to council to show where those money allocations went, to what organizations, and to how it benefited the community.
Okay, thank you. It says here, the organization within the current fiscal year must spend the grant funding on the sole purpose for which it was approved. So we're going to approve that in March. So will that mean that they have 12 months in order to, rather than in January? So are we going to have a new fiscal year for this grant application process?
Madam CFO.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we will not. The expectation is they would spend it before the city's year end, and if not, they'd write a letter to the Financial Services Department asking for an extension.
Okay, thank you. Talked about the where you have to spend those dollars within that year, that fiscal year. So if they don't spend the dollars or show how they spend them, what do? Do you go and get them back, or do you then say, okay, you can't apply again? I don't think we need some clarification on
Yeah,
that.
Madam CFO.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's in our policy as well. There are certain reporting requirements, and if those reporting requirements do not happen, then that organization will not receive funding in following years.
Okay, good, thanks.
Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I was wondering about the timelines. The opening of the period of application is February 10th, and the closing is March 9th. Is the committee comfortable that that gives the groups enough time, given especially that this material might be somewhat new to applying groups?
Madam CFO.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Definitely it's enough time. Even this is the only year that will be that period. Normally it's the month of September, but because we're past that point now, it's February to March. We've had many inquiries. We will let organizations know through our website, through social media, that the program is open. We've already built the application form. It's ready to be posted to our website once the report is approved.
Good, I was going to ask about the application form. And then if somebody needs help working their way through the application form, obviously it's the finance department that would be available to answer questions or help people with the application.
They could call on us first, and then if we need information such as in-kind services, etc., we'll reach out to Recreation Services Municipal Works for that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Do the hard-working committee members want to comment? Councillor McIntosh.
Just want to thank Tracy, Mark, and Cindy for their expertise in helping the committee, Todd and myself and Dean. This really streamlines the process of giving out grants. It's always been my pet peeve is that at budget time, we decide this in about 2.5 hours, and it's like, I'll give your committee 10, take 15, and it's been really, really not the way to do it. And this is much more, it's better, it's fairer. There are no guarantees here. It says there that just because you get the money once doesn't mean you're getting the second time. I think there's a feeling among some groups, just show up every year, give a 2-minute presentation and go home with the money. And now it's more even keel, and I think it's a much better process, and I think this is going to work very nicely.
Councillor Hollingsworth?
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I, like my colleague, would like to thank admin for their efforts. Made it a lot easy, nice and easy, smooth process. When we needed information the following week, it was there. Really appreciate that. Thank you very much. I think what's important to note, Your Worship, is that by creating these policies, we turn the debate into how, for council, into how much as a whole we would like to allocate, and then it kind of takes the political process sort of out and becomes based on merit criteria that everybody can read and analyze. And as my colleague has suggested, it's far more, I'd like to believe it will be far more consistent, it will be far more predictable, and kind of something we can gauge. I think as well, certainly policies are always something you can tweak along the way. It's kind of in its infancy. I'd like to think it'll work nice and smooth, but if adjustments need to be made a little bit on the fly, so be it. But I think for the most part, it's pretty set. We try to address all the outstanding issues in the community that might percolate to the surface. I'm pretty excited to see how it's going to play itself out. I'm confident that things will be much smoother and cleaner for us and for administration as well, plus in the community, because they'll know exactly what's going on. Thank you.
Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, I'd also have to give thanks to Tracy and Cindy. I don't think you understand how much we were throwing on them from 1 week and expecting the information back the week after. It always came so well organized. And I'm pretty sure we didn't make any friends with them when we went from 3 funding streams to 4. We need to add a 4th one, and that was that was a fun thing to ask them to do again. So they took our information, they came back to these meetings and had a framework for us to work on. So it was very, very structured meetings, and they were very, very fruitful. As far as I know, some people may have concerns. You raised a few, and as I learned in these meetings, Dean is really good at coming up with scenarios that Councillor Hollingsworth should say with things that could happen. So I'm pretty sure he's starting like 14 or 15 festivals this year. He threw everything at us, and but there were good conversations, because there's a lot of times you don't realize, you know, are we leaving a group out because of this, or are we leaving a group out because of that? And so a lot of scenarios were brought up, and I was confident with the answers that we got back. It really does take the politics out of it. I mean, I've only been through one budget process sitting in this chair, but I was through like 7 or 8 sitting over in those chairs. And it always amazed me how we could pass a $2 million project in about 3 minutes of conversation, and then this $200,000 envelope would take 3 hours of basically throwing numbers around and taking them back and then giving them away. It just boggled my mind. And I get it, because it's a bit of a political process, and we have groups that, you know, we're all passionate about, and we want to make sure everybody gets a fair shake. What I think what this does is now everybody does get a fair shake, because it took the politics out of it. So I think that's why this is going to work particularly well. Is here's the envelope, here's the 4 streams we're dealing with, here's the groups that applied, and whose application is best. It's going to get scored, much the way we would deal with RFPs. You know, these things come back, we score them. So it was good. It's about as fair as we could make it, and I'm kind of proud of the work that the 6 people put in over the course of the last 6 weeks, and I think this is going to work very, very well. Thank you.
Any other comments? I just want to go back, a question around seniors again. I'm always particularly concerned about those 2 groups, because the 2 seniors groups that we have are incredibly efficient in this city, and I'm always amazed at how young everybody looks. Those members really stay healthy and stay connected. And I just want to make sure that this is not in any way going to change how they're going to proceed in terms of getting that money that leverages provincial funds, right? Because there was some comment there about a 20% of operational. I want to delve into that a little bit more, Madam CFO.
Through you, Madam Mayor. What we understand through the other levels of funding is that there are requirements that in order to receive a grant, an organization can only have 20% of administration costs. So if they're receiving provincial and federal funding under those scenarios, the municipality should expect the same, or it would automatically apply. And so we've put it into, because they are volunteer organizations, and if they do have a budget, you would think that 20% administration would be a reasonable amount of administration dollars of where they're spending the money that they're receiving.
So we don't anticipate any problems for the two seniors groups?
We don't think so. Of course, like Councillor Hollingsworth said, if the program does need to be tweaked, we can do that. And annually, when we come back with a report to council, that is part of the report. If changes need to be made in the program, of course, that's council that'll make those changes to those policies, terms of reference. And so that could happen, that will happen annually with our report.
Thank you for that. And I did note Councillor Hollingsworth's comments, and I did read that there, that, you know, this is the first time that we're doing it this way, and obviously we're going to be getting comments, and then we'll have further discussion. But I want to say that this is committee work at its best. Everybody rolled up their sleeves and did some very difficult and very effective work. You will recall at our last budget process, almost exactly a year ago now, that we all said to ourselves and publicly that it would be the last time that we would be doing things that way. And guess what? We're standing by what we said, and this is going to be a new day. So I thank the committee members and the admin members, councillor colleagues for this work, and I'm very, very grateful. We're all very grateful moving forward. Merci beaucoup. All in favor? Against? Carried.
Draft smoking bylaw. Action recommended is that council direct administration to bring the draft smoking bylaw back to council for approval at the February 10th council meeting.
Moved by is Councillor Gardner, seconded by Councillor Grant. Discussion. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not going to support the motion. We have a litter bylaw. It says you're not allowed to litter in the city of Cornwall. What's the difference between throwing a cigarette butt on the ground and littering? Is it in essence the same thing? I don't know if anybody can answer it, but I think it is. And my point is, if we can't enforce our litter bylaw, how do we think we're going to enforce our smoking bylaw when essentially they're the same thing? Second thing, Your Worship, I can't support it, is that the argument was that cigarette butts are causing damage to the environment, and I'm sure they are. The fish are eating them, and fair enough. But if that's the rationale for passing this cigarette smoking bylaw, then in essence, shouldn't we pass a bylaw that says no drinking of plastic containers in the parks? Because plastic is also damaging to the ecosystem. No bottles, because like you could go on, and in essence, all that stuff is covered by the litter bylaw that we currently don't really enforce because there's not enough human beings. I don't begrudge bylaw or the police, we just don't have enough bodies. And finally, there's an additional cost that goes into purchasing signs and that kind of thing. And so my point is, Your Worship, if you think of the cost, you think of the fact that while there's an environmental issue, there are bigger, grander environmental issues that we aren't dealing with. And we in essence have a bylaw that already meets the expectations of this bylaw that we are currently not enforcing as it is because we don't have enough people and we need to hire more, and there's the grander budget type debate. So because of those reasons, Your Worship, I can't support it. It's kind of like this. Imagine your child won't listen to what you've said, so you put them I don't know, you take their snack away and they wail even more. So then you take the drink away, their favorite can of soda, they wail even more. You turn off the TV, they wail even more. It's like we just keep doing the same thing in hopes that somehow this will magically fix the problem. And quite frankly, I don't think that it will. So I'm not prepared to support the bylaw. And as I said, for the reasons listed. Thank you, Your Worship.
Any other comments concerning the bylaw? Councillor Gardner and then Councillor Hébert.
Well, I have to ask a question. We have below here passing bylaws, we have 6 bylaw officers. It looks like we're putting 4. Is that more bylaw officers than we already have? Or is it just the number that we've had all along?
Madam, Mr. Boileau? Okay.
Actually, that is, my understanding is that is a different set of enforcement officers. The enforcement officers who would be looking at this would be the bylaw officers in our building and bylaw office, and so there will be 5 of them, together, of course, with our police force, and in some cases as well, of course, the health unit, who are enforcing anything that is in reference to the Smoke-Free Ontario. I also want to mention that Smoke-Free Ontario, and Mr. Fothrop is here and can answer some specific questions as well, but it came to our realization as we looked at this thing that what we have put before you is really just a minor extension of what already exists with Smoke-Free Ontario. So when it says that you can't smoke on the premises of a recreational facility like the Civic Complex, and because the Civic Complex is on a very large property, Smoke-Free Ontario is causing that almost all of Lamoureux Park is smoke-free anyway. So, but the reason I say about Smoke-Free Ontario is because the health unit can enforce anything to do with that. So we have our bylaw enforcement officers, we have the police, and we have the health unit.
Well, I'm going to support the recommendation simply because at the end of the day, we need to put the message out there that we won't allow people just to throw their butts out or their plastic bottles or anything. Maybe we'll catch some, maybe we won't, but we need to tell, especially visitors, tourists, that we don't allow that. We don't want to allow that. The message has got to get out there that Cornwall is litter-free. And that's the only message I want to put out there. We may not have the bylaw officers to do it, but we need to tell people we're a clean city.
Councillor Hébert and then Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll be brief. I just want to make sure that everybody knows this goes beyond littering, right? Like, yes, a ripple effect of putting a ban on smoking in these areas will mean we'll have less cigarette butts in these beautiful public areas. But I think the essence here is also about creating a healthier, smoke-free environment on our waterfront trails. And at the same time, reducing the amount of litter, hopefully, fingers crossed. Understanding that, you know, it's very hard to enforce, but we all wear seat belts, and that's, well, sometimes, and that's hard to enforce. And so it just goes along with all the other rules that we hope our residents are following. And also, if Councillor Dean wants to bring a plastic bottle ban, I'd be happy to discuss that one day.
Next meeting. Let's get them all now.
Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I kind of echo Councillor Hollingsworth's comments. Just in general, I just think it's an unenforceable bylaw. I think we have some work to do on bylaw enforcement before we start implementing things like this. And not necessarily, but I do have some questions. So the 20-meter bylaw, I brought this up. I'm not sure I ever got an answer. 20 meters from the recreational path seems kind of vague, because that path does go very close to properties where you would park your car. I also think the amount, $250, is a bit steep for a first fine, when if you are parking, it's a $20 fine. Why is it more? I just have some issues with this, so I remain opposed to it. Today we're just talking about a draft bylaw. I was opposed to it at the beginning. I remain opposed to it. Thank you.
Mr. Boileau, did you want to address that? Not Councillor Bergeron's opposition, but the first part of his
By all
comments,
means.
which were a question.
By
Yeah.
all means.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, the 20 meters is obviously a difficult thing to, you know, to put in practice. Although we do currently deal with that sort of measurement from a building, because that has always been the case, that from 9 meters from a building. But I think generally speaking, the public get the idea that you shouldn't be near a building, you shouldn't be near a bike path, and we will have to put some signage in place that identifies that. I know Mr. Fothrop worked on this bylaw, this draft bylaw, based on some of the information from the Brockville bylaw.
Mm.
I don't know if he has any additional information on the $250 and where that comes from.
Mr. Jamie Fothrop?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the $250 fine was the set fine for the city of Brockville, so you're free to set it at whatever we deem to be appropriate. And the 20 meters, I chose that because the path does veer close to the waterfront and away from the water's edge, and how it was brought to council originally by the Great River Network, that was the primary concern, was to make the waterfront smoke-free, so I picked an offset that would include the shoreline.
Councillor Bergeron, you
Yep,
follow up?
just a quick follow-up. I just want to know, do we know roughly what the amount of fines we've given out in 2019 for smoking-related infractions has been? I don't even know who to ask the question to.
I'll start with Mr. Boileau.
I personally wouldn't know. Again, the city is not the only organization that does this. Smoke Free Ontario could be asked that question as well. I'm not familiar with their data.
Mr. Fothrop?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't have the exact number either, but I did meet with the health unit who does enforce this, and they do express or recognize the challenges with enforcing these regulations. They have essentially one officer that covers a very large territory.
So, I mean, the question is, has anyone ever been given a fine for not smoking? Do you know of any references of a fine being given for not smoking?
Not that I know of from our city staff.
No, but it's a little bit like the history of, you know, smoking in restaurants, et cetera, where they would have a mandate. And of course, you know, this smoking in Ontario is I'm sure what is happening with our health unit is exactly what's happening with most other health units. There is limited resource to enforce it, but it doesn't mean that it's not important to them.
Fair enough. It's a question I'll ask at budget. I think it's a trackable number, so I'll ask it again next week. Not critical to my decision here on this vote. Thank you.
Any other comments? Yeah, Councillor McIntosh and then Councillor
I
McDonald.
think the answer to Councillor Bergeron's question would come from the health unit. I don't think the city police enforce it, or the city bylaw officer. The Eastern Ontario Health Unit has smoke cops, and they do lay charges. I've heard about them, and they could easily supply us with the answer for that one, how many charges are laid and how many convictions they get. So I think we should go to the Eastern Ontario to get that answer.
I would think that's a fair point, yeah. Councillor McDonald?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to say I support this policy, and I hope we do adopt it. There has been so much progress made over the last 25 years in smoking. Most of it has been based on education, and basically it comes down to us establishing a standard of what we want to present in terms of our city to visitors and to people who live here. I know we had a lengthy debate one year about whether we could dare prohibit smoking on the bike path, and we decided we did not allow it on the part of the bike path, the northern part that goes right by the kids' play area in Lamoureux Park. So we're just, you know, year by year, we just go a little bit farther, and we get a little bit farther. And I don't think the fact that some people are going to get away with this, you'll always have scofflaws. And for heaven's sake, we can't legislate or establish bylaws for the malefactors. You know, we have to just move on, and they'll get the message, or they'll be left by the side of the road. smoking.
Anybody else? I just wanted to come back to some of your comments, Mr. Boileau, around the Smoke-Free Ontario Act. So, are you saying that this was, a lot of this was already covered by them and we weren't fully aware of that?
Actually, I believe Jamie Fothrick would be,
Okay.
because he had conversation with the health unit, but I think it was put in place a certain date, but its enforcement and enactment took some time. But I'll let Jamie answer.
Thank you.
Through
Yes?
you, Madam Mayor, that's correct. The Smoke-Free Ontario Act recently changed. Changes came into effect in 2019, which changed the regulations for recreation facilities. It previously used to be you couldn't smoke within 9 meters of the entrance. Well, now I believe it's 20 meters from the property. And so we had a meeting with the health unit to discuss the implications to the civic complex, because the property encompasses a good portion of Lamley Park, to see exactly how that would be interpreted in that scenario. And they confirmed that no, it would be all deemed to be smoke-free currently.
The entire park?
Well, I'll say a good 2/3 of it, probably up to the Rotary workout area.
Right.
There's a property divide in and around there. So west of there is a separate parcel, but east of there, it's a parcel that includes the civic complex, curling center, even the ball diamonds, Legion ball diamonds are encompassed in that as well.
It's interesting that the province is already doing this, right? Sometimes that happens. In the report at page 175, it does say, though, that the health unit will only have the authority to enforce the restrictions contained in the Act and not in our bylaw. Is that correct?
Yes.
So then, we're not really gonna get assistance from them then?
Yeah, so, to you, Madam Mayor, they will enforce what applies to Smoke-Free Ontario.
Okay.
But what we have done is we've gone a little bit further with the trails. So the trails wouldn't necessarily
Will be
be
our
there, but we would try to enforce that. Again, if there was a, reoccurring situation that someone is always at the same park bench, et cetera, I think we would probably, in fact, we are familiar with locations that are probably going to be a problem, where this type of activity occurs on a reoccurring basis. We will have to go to those locations, I'm sure, whether it be through our enforcement officers or with the police, depending on the time of day, and remind these people, I'm sure with, notices, et cetera, or warnings. And if it continues to occur, we may get into a situation of a fine.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that you are meeting with the health unit, and so that we can all be on the same page. I'm sure you will continue to have discussions as we move forward with this, so that's a good thing. I'm going to support this. It's about setting community standards, and that's often what the province and municipal councils do. I know that there are limitations around enforcement, but in terms of setting a tone in our community, I think this is part of that process. So, all in favor of the motion? Against? Carried. Madam Clerk.
Moving on to passing of bylaws, Madam Mayor. That bylaws 2020-16 to 33 inclusive.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Bergeron?
Can we get 20.1 to 20.6 voted on separately, and 20.15 voted on separately as well?
Sorry, Madam Clerk.
So 20.1 to 20.6?
Yes.
So the first motion would be for bylaws 2020-16 to 2021, which are the bylaw enforcement officers.
Okay, moved by Councillor Hubert and Councillor Gardner. All in favor? Against? Carried.
And then one motion for the rest?
I'm confused.
I'm also confused.
Which motion was just passed?
From bylaw 2006, or bylaw 16 to bylaw 21.
Okay. That is not the bylaw enforcement officer, as you said. That's 20.1 to 20.6?
Yes.
That's a separate motion.
For all of the 6 bylaws.
Is that what
One
was-
motion for all of the bylaw enforcement officers.
Is that what was just passed?
Yes.
You read it as 20.16.
Yes, that's another one.
So the bylaw number is 2020-16 to bylaw 2020-033. On the agenda, it's numbered 20.1 to 20.6.
It's passed? I don't have to say on it? We just voted on it? It's what I wanted to speak about, it's voted on.
Madam Clerk? Did we?
Perhaps I misunderstood, Madam Mayor. That was the motion.
Yes, but the motion was given, and then there was no opportunity for debate.
I thought we were moving the ones out so that then you could debate the ones left.
Yeah, I'd like to debate the ones we just passed. It's too late, it's passed. It's fine. It's a minor question I had.
Councillor Bergeron, why don't you ask the question?
Question is, why are we hiring extra bylaw officers to enforce parking? We don't have an explanation in the bylaws, and so I'm very curious why we're appointing 5 new bylaw officers for
Okay.
parking infractions.
So I'm going to allow the question, and I'm going to turn to Madam CAO.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to refer the question to Mr. Bildewick.
Through you, Madam Mayor, there are no, these are not new hires, these are just simply staff that we're appointing as bylaw officers.
So I appreciate that fully. I know they're staffed already. Why are we asking that they be appointing parking? I don't see an explanation for that.
Oh.
I just see, let's make them parking officials.
Okay, so, so we have issues, particularly during the winter time, where we have cars that are parked across sidewalks, or cars that are parked at night whenever we have parking restrictions on, and because our bylaw people don't, or regular parking bylaw people do not work at night, these individuals do, because they're on, they are duty sub foremen and they are on around the clock, and so they'll be able to go and provide or issue fines for the violations I just spoke about.
Okay, thank you. That's an exact explanation of what I think should be included in this report. Is that a normal thing? Does that happen every year? Or is this a new request to issue some new fines that we've never done before?
Through you, Madam Mayor, in the past, it's always been, we relied on the police to come and provide these fines or have these cars towed, and they're just finding that they have other priorities, and so this allows us to move forward within our own department.
Okay, thank you. That's an excellent explanation.
Okay. Sorry about that. In the future, we need some clarity around what exactly you want to ask, so we make sure that the clerk has a clear understanding of what's to be voted on and not voted on. So we will endeavor to do that the next
Thank you.
time. Thank you. Next item, Madam Clerk.
So now we're looking for a motion to approve bylaws 22 to 33.
Councillor Grant and Councillor Towndale. Any discussion? All in favor? Against? Carried. Next item.
Madam Mayor, we are at the reports from standing and special committees of council.
Any reports? Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I've got 3 coming from the art world. I think some of the most exciting public events are ones where you get a mix of disciplines, and on February 8th at the Civic Complex, there's going to be probably the most spectacular public competitive event, and that is the Cheerleader Championships. I think it's a province-wide endeavor, and it's absolutely a wonderful mix of athleticism and art. And if you want to go early, because parking is non-existent once the event gets underway. And then the second event is one, it's going to be at the Arts Center. This is a community sing-along. February 14th is really important to the collective and all the groups that have been working on fundraising for the Arts Center. And so at 4 o'clock, we're kicking the event off with some drumming and leading from there into song. And it's simply to come on out and make some noise and sing and have a free cupcake. Of course, if you're a kid, you'll probably want to decorate it, and you can do that too. And there'll be a craft corner, and you're going to be there, Madam Mayor.
I am.
You'll be emceeing, and it should be a pretty wonderful event. And then the last one, we collaborate with the Traveling College on Akwesasne, and they're having an event on the 15th, the day after our singing event, on Akwesasne, and it's much like the Battle of the Canvas that we had last year here. So they're doing something similar. They're calling it Art War, and it's in Akwesasne, and you can register through the Traveling College, and it's basically the same format. You get together whether you're an artist or not. I think you participated last year.
That was a
Did you
disaster.
call yourself
Yeah.
an artist? I know you made a painting, and I think it was for sale at the end of the night, so anybody can play. You don't have to be an artist. You just want to get out there and have some fun. So 3 biggies coming up in the art scene.
Thank you, Councillor McDonald. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. A little outside of the rules.
That's okay. Go ahead, Councillor Hollingsworth.
Last week, last week, the city hosted a Careers Day for the students at CCVS, grade 10 careers students, and I just want to take an opportunity to thank administration, everybody who participated. I know it was a significant undertaking, kind of getting all the moving parts to work well. It was well received by both staff and student at CCVS. Certainly, it's always exciting to hear of young people consider not leaving but staying here and seeing potential career paths. Excellent little recruitment exercise for the municipality. As I said, I want to thank staff who did it. I know it probably wasn't something that just fell into place easily. I imagine it was a lot of work, and I appreciate it, and it was well received, and I hope that we can perhaps pursue this type of thing in the future, simply because I think it's good for young people to know what the city actually does, not just here per se, but in the grand scheme of things. So thanks to admin, CAO in particular for putting it together, but to admin in whole for really pulling up their socks and putting our best foot forward. Thanks again.
Thank you for that. I'm going to turn it over to Madam CAO to speak to that quickly. I just want to say that CCVS sent a high school class here to meet with me, and part of that discussion was around careers, and then things took off. The CAO and our public information coordinator took it to the next level, and I'd like to just have the CAO address that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So there was quite a bit of coordination put together by Emma Meldrum, our public information coordinator. We wanted to, just for everybody's information, we wanted to utilize our transit services to give the students an opportunity to ride transit. There was a rotating program through various municipal departments. The departments, it's my understanding the departments were equally as energized and excited to have students come into their departments, and they were pretty proud to share what their environments were and what their careers were. So I think overall it was a resounding success. Next year I'll try to not plan it on a snow day.
Yeah.
But no, it was good, and I think everybody enjoyed it. Now that we have a model in place, I think it could be done again.
So,
thank you.
high schools out there, if you're interested, let us know. It's great. Thank you to admin for all of that. Any other reports from standing committees? Madam Clerk?
Then we have our unfinished business listing. Recommended that council receive this listing for January 27th.
Councillor Bergeron, do you want to move that, or did you have a question?
I do not want to move.
Okay, who's moving it? Councillor Grant and Councillor Hébert. Now we'll go for questions.
So I have a few questions about this report. It's an important report. It kind of talks about the things that are coming down the pipeline. I don't see the report about lights in Lemmer Park, which we passed in November, which was supposed to be handed to us before budget time, which was in the motion. This is our last meeting before budget time, so I don't see it listed at all. Curious when that will be coming.
Okay. Madam CAO?
I think we'll take that back and we'll get that information. So if we had committed to providing that information, we'll try to get it to council as quickly as possible.
Okay. There's also, at the last council meeting, which I wasn't present for, there was a remote workers bylaw pass, which should see February 24th as the return. I don't see this also on this unfinished business report, unless I'm missing something.
Madam CAO?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, the item should be on the list, and we've already had discussions with staff internally, so the report is planned to come back at that meeting.
And then another item, the report on the length of public council meetings, which also passed the last meeting, which I was not present at. in reading the minutes, there was no date tied to it, and I don't see it in TBD. I'm just curious, that's 3 things in unfinished business that aren't in here out of, one of them is today, which we've already passed. I'd just like to really see this document be a lot more precise, personally.
Okay.
Thank you.
Did you want to respond, Madam CEO, to the motion that was made by Councillor Hollingsworth at the last meeting?
So with that, we have also had discussions internally through administration. So
Mhm.
it also has some overlap with the procedural bylaw. And there's also other items in there with respect to, we've been discussing presentations. We've been looking at possible
Town hall.
town hall meetings to allow or to facilitate people to be able to come in and address council. So although it's not identified on that list, I can assure council that there's been discussions that have taken place in the background. And I will also, on the matter with the procedural bylaw and the number of items, I will talk to the mayor, because we might want to think about actually scheduling, I think, a special council meeting to be able to sit down and properly discuss all of those items within that procedural bylaw. It might be too much to bring to one council meeting.
So we will get that on the unfinished business list, but as the CEO said, we are working very hard on all of those items, particularly the procedural bylaw. Looking forward to that discussion. Any other questions? All in favor? Against? Carried.
And the confirming bylaw 34, Madam Mayor.
Moved by Councillor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor McDonald. All in favor? Carried. So before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I want to publicly thank Mr. Hale for his work with the Standard Freeholder. We are fortunate as a community to have media cover our council meetings. That's not happening everywhere. And in a city our size, we're very fortunate to have so much media, assuring a lot of transparency. So, Mr. Hale, thank you for always being here, every council meeting, every budget meeting, and providing the coverage and the transparency and the information for the public that that makes us all accountable and that makes this, you know, really at the end of the day, a better community. So thank you. We wish you well. I think you're going to Kingston. At least it's not Brockville. Not just, at least it's not Brockville. So you're going to Kingston, so we wish you well and success. And yeah, safe travel. Merci.
It's the city. It's a lovely town, and I don't know how many people know this, but I'm actually from the only other Cornwall in the country, PEI. So this town always
I didn't know.
sort of loomed large in my imagination, and I'm very happy that I was able to actually come and live here and see what a great city it is. I hope that more people outside of this community realize that at some point. And I think with confident leadership, it'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
People will appreciate Cornwall for what it is, which is a lovely, up-and-coming city.
Thank you very much for that. Appreciate that.
Take that.
Thank you. All right. Thank you as well for all those who stayed through this entire council meeting. Thank you, folks. Much appreciated. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Hébert, Councillor Bergeron, all in favor? Carried. Merci.
I spilled my water bottle on your agenda
Yeah,
earlier.
I
forgot to
figured.
tell you.
And I
Sorry.
said, oh, she
I
used
tried
the old,
to wipe it up.
she used the old binder over the water. trick.
Sorry.
Other
No, I
motions.
tried to wash it. I just didn't
okay.
realize it got wet.
Small thing in a big ship.
I didn't have a question.